So in Chapter 6, we will be covering the foreign exchange market and the balance of payments. So for this first part in our video series, we are specifically going to focus on the foreign exchange market. We will define what it is, how it operates, and then the mathematical formulas that we need to calculate out the exchange rates and how that impacts international trade. The first thing I want to do is actually just define, well, what is foreign exchange? All foreign exchange is foreign money. So in the United States, obviously we use the US dollar and the corresponding coins, but any other country that you go to is going to have their own currency. And so that's all foreign exchange is currency that is denominated in a currency other than your own. So the US dollar actually constitutes foreign currency for another country. If you went to Canada, they would consider the US dollar to be foreign exchange, whereas here in the United States, we consider the Canadian dollar to be foreign exchange. So that's all foreign exchange is the money that is denominated in a foreign country's currency. Now, by definition, the foreign exchange market is just the global marketplace in which people trade one currency for another. So in other words, you could have a bank in New York that is going to trade currencies with a bank in London, depending on what those exchange rates are. One thing about the foreign exchange market is that it does not have a specific geographic location. The trading is going to occur all over the world, usually electronically or by telephone. So in other words, you can trade, one trader can call another trader by telephone, but oftentimes it's done over computers by just exchanging computer messages and then making that trade take place. So again, all we're going to do in the foreign exchange market is trade one currency for another. So if we wanted to trade US dollars for Canadian dollars, that would be a transaction that would be involved in the foreign exchange market. Notice that we're not buying goods or services, we're just trading money, one currency for another. So the foreign exchange market, those transactions would not be included in like what we learned about in the previous chapter of gross domestic product, because you're not actually purchasing any goods or services. You're simply trading one currency for another. Now, how would you participate in the foreign exchange market? Most of us as individuals, if we were going to, and we didn't have jobs in the trading industry, the only way that we would actually participate in the foreign exchange market is through tourism, which actually constitutes a very, very small percentage of the foreign exchange market. So in other words, if you have currency, and you were exchanging that for another currency because you were going to travel abroad, that would be interaction in the foreign exchange market. But again, that's a relatively small fraction of the overall transactions that take place in the foreign exchange market. The majority of foreign exchange transactions involve buying and selling bank deposits that are denominated in foreign currency. So we're talking about very large amounts. It can be like from a checking account or a firm's corporate account. But again, it's the majority of foreign exchange transactions are buying and selling those bank deposits. Now, if you're going to buy a foreign currency, then it requires an exchange rate. An exchange rate is basically just the price of the foreign money. So if I wanted to travel to, let's say, Mexico, I would need pesos in order to purchase goods and services down there. So in other words, how do I get pesos? I buy them with US dollars. So to know how many pesos I would get for each US dollar, I need to know what their price is. And so that's why we need to know what the exchange rate is, because the exchange rate just tells us what price that currency is going to be. So again, an exchange rate is the price of one country's money in terms of another country's money. And so what we have here is an exchange rate table where we can actually see what the prices are for different countries in relation to the US dollar. So I have 4 countries listed here. You'll see in column 1 that indicates the currency of each country that we're looking at. So here's column 1 right here. You'll notice the only 4 countries that I have are Argentina, Australia, the European Union, and then Canada. Now, normally each individual country maintains their own individual currency. So you'll notice Argentina has a peso, Australia has their dollar, and Canada has their dollar. The European Union would be the one exception where you have multiple countries that actually all have adopted to use the same exact currency. So all of the countries that are part of the European Union all use the euro. Now, the second column of data, the second column is right here. This is where it's showing the US dollar per currency, or more specifically, how much one unit of foreign currency is worth in US dollars. So we see that for Argentina, it says 0.3269. So because we're looking at this in currency, we just round that to the nearest cent. So that would be 33 cents. So basically we would need 33 cents to purchase 1 Argentina peso. That's what that exchange rate tells us. Notice that for the Australian dollar, it says 0.7543. So again, we would round that to 75 cents. So we would need 75 cents to buy 1 Australian dollar. The euro is 1.21, so we would round that to $1.22. So we would need $1.22 in US dollars to just buy 1 euro, according to this exchange table. And then for Canada, we notice the exchange rate is 0.8583, so we would just round that to 86 cents. So now we know we need 86 cents to purchase 1 Canadian dollar. So I'll write those numbers on here so you remember that. Remember, we always round since we're talking in numbers, a currency now. So there's no confusion as to how we would round. You just round to the nearest cent since we're talking about money. So that's what we would be looking at right there. The third column of data indicates how much one US dollar is worth in the foreign currency. So that's what this column of data is showing right here. And the way that we come up with these numbers is we just take the reciprocal of the numbers that we had in our second column. So now for the second column, we were able to see how much US dollar we would need, US currency we would need to buy 1 unit of the foreign currency. Now we're going the other direction. In other words, how much is 1 US dollar worth in foreign currency? So again, notice that for the Argentina peso, it says 3.059. So of course we would round that to 306. So we would need 3 pesos and 6 centavos to buy 1 US dollar. In other words, now we're going the other direction. Notice for Australia, it says 1.3257, so we'd round that to $1.33. So we would need 1 Australian dollar and 33 cents to purchase 1 US dollar. We would round the euro to 83 euro cents, so you would need 83 euro cents to purchase 1 US dollar, and then we would round the Canadian dollar to $1.17. So you would need $1.17 Canadian dollar, 17 cents in Canadian dollars in order to purchase 1 US dollar. So again, if you know the exchange rate going one way, you just take the reciprocal to get the exchange rate going the other way. So again, you can see, how much is 1 unit of foreign currency worth in US dollars plus how much is 1 US dollar worth in foreign currency. Now exchange rates do change daily, so you'll notice down here at the bottom of our table, these were the exchange rates for January 7th, 2006. So these certainly would not be the same exchange rates that we have today. They do change all of the time. Again, when I used to work in the banking industry, we used to actually get, exchange rate tables every single day. So if somebody wanted to come in and exchange a foreign currency for US dollars, we would have to pull out the exchange rate table and look that data up. Everything is just done over the computer today. So now, they can just easily pull up the currency converter online and do that math very easily. Now, one thing that you probably noticed when you were looking at that exchange rate table is that some countries maintain the same names for their currency. So again, going back and looking at this, again, notice that Australia, they use a dollar, and then also Canada uses a dollar. And then of course we know United States uses a dollar. However, all of our currencies are not the same. A US dollar is not worth the same amount as an Australian dollar. So in order to make sure that we can distinguish between the different countries' currencies that have the same name, we use what's called ISO symbols. So the International Standards Organization gives each country their own ISO symbol, and so that way you can distinguish between the different countries that have the same exact currency. So again, think about the US dollar. The US dollar, we have an ISO symbol of USD, United States dollar. If we're talking about the Canadian dollar, their ISO symbol is CAD, the Canadian dollar. If we're talking about the Australian dollar, their ISO symbol is AUD. So in other words, even though each one of us has the dollar, we have a different ISO symbol so that we can distinguish between a US dollar versus a Canadian dollar versus an Australian dollar. Now, you would want to know what a current exchange rate is with another country if you wanted to buy foreign currency with US dollars, or if you wanted to exchange foreign money for US dollars. The exchange rate itself is what is going to allow us to convert the foreign currency price into its domestic currency equivalent. But of course, normally it's not that you want the currency, it's that you actually want to buy a good that is denominated in the foreign currency's value. So you would need the exchange rate for that. In other words, maybe I'm not necessarily concerned with having Canadian dollars, but I want to purchase something that is denominated in Canadian dollars that I found online. So if I want to know how much it's going to cost me in US dollars, I need to know what the current exchange rate is. So let's look at an example so we can see how we would use that. So let's say, for example, that I find an item that I want to buy online and it's being listed at a price of 50 Canadian dollars. In other words, it's an international seller on eBay who is selling it for 50 Canadian dollars, and I want to know how much that item is going to cost me in US dollars when I purchase it. Because usually when you purchase something with your credit card online, your credit card company will automatically do the conversion. But I want to know ahead of time how much this Canadian item is going to cost me. So I would want to look up the currency converter rates online to see what the current exchange rate is between the US dollar and the Canadian dollar. And let's say that it is 0.75. So basically what that would mean is that the Canadian dollar costs 75 cents in US dollars. So if I want to know what the price of the item on eBay would cost me, all I would have to do is take the foreign price of 50 Canadian dollars and multiply it by the current exchange rate, which is 0.75. So 50 times 0.75 would give me a value of $37.50. So now I know that if I were to buy something that was listed as 50 Canadian dollars, its equivalent in US dollars would be $37.50. So very, very simple to figure out what the price would be for me as long as I know what that exchange rate is. Now, when we're talking about exchange rates in macroeconomics, something that we're really concerned with is the impact it's going to have on international trade. To be more specific, what happens when those exchange rates change. I already indicated that exchange rates change on a daily basis. So as those exchange rates change, what, if any, impact are they going to have on trade that takes place between countries? Because basically that means it's going to change the price of goods and services that you buy from other countries when those exchange rates are not staying constant. So one thing that can happen is what we call currency appreciation. And so that's what you see on this slide right here. By definition, currency appreciation just means that its value rises in relation to another currency. So in our previous example, we said the exchange rate between the US dollar per Canadian dollar was 0.75. So I would need 75 cents to buy 1 Canadian dollar. But let's say that exchange rate changes from 75 cents to 80 cents. What that would mean is that the Canadian dollar has appreciated in relation to the US dollar, because it's become more expensive for us now to get that Canadian dollar. Prior to the appreciation, I only had to pay 75 cents to get a Canadian dollar. Now I have to pay 80 cents. So again, that's why we would say the currency is appreciated, because it's become more valuable in relation to the US dollar. It's become pricier for us to purchase now. And so when this occurs, what impact do you think it's going to have on trade between the United States and Canada? Let's look at our previous example to see how that change in exchange rate would actually alter the price that we paid for that original item that we wanted to buy on eBay. So originally we said the sweater was 50 Canadian dollars. The exchange rate was 75 cents, so it would ultimately cost us $37.50. If the Canadian dollar is now appreciating and our exchange rate is now 80 cents, notice that makes that sweater more expensive now. Rather than the price only being $37.50 in US dollars, it's now equivalent to $40 in US dollars, because now again it changes the formula. We're now multiplying 50 Canadian dollars by 0.8 rather than 0.75. So again, even though the actual price of the sweater didn't change in Canada, because the exchange rate changed, that changed the price of that good to foreigners. So if you live in Canada, obviously the price stays the same. But if you are a foreigner outside of Canada purchasing that good and Canada's dollar has appreciated, their goods are now going to become more expensive. So what happens in terms of international trade is that when one country's currency appreciates in relation to their trading partners, the demand for their products is going to fall, because now their goods are more expensive to the rest of the world. So again, think about, this was just one example, one sweater, but normally when we're talking about trade, we're talking about, thousands of thousands, if not millions of units of goods being sold. So if the price of all those goods and services are now more expensive, theoretically the demand for all of those products is going to fall. We can also look and see what's going to happen if a currency depreciates. So that's when their value falls in relation to another currency. So again, in our previous example, we were looking at how the Canadian dollar had appreciated against the US dollar. Well, we know that then that means the US dollar must be depreciating against the Canadian dollar. And again, all we would need to do is take the reciprocal of the exchange rate to see the exchange rate going the other direction. So again, just to recap, if you know the price in US dollars of a foreign currency, you can find the price of the US dollar in that currency by simply taking the reciprocal. So you see I have the example right over here showing you how all you do is take the reciprocal to get the exchange rate going the other way. So again, we know that initially the exchange rate for the dollar, it was 75 cents to buy 1 Canadian dollar. Now we just take the reciprocal of that, which would end up being $1.33 in Canadian dollars. That would be the exchange rate for the US dollar. So in other words, a Canadian would need $1.33 in order to purchase 1 US dollar. Notice what happens when their currency appreciates. Now when we take the reciprocal of 1 divided by 80 cents, that drops the exchange rate to $1.25 Canadian dollars. So now a Canadian only needs $1.25 of their currency to purchase 1 US dollar. So our dollar has become cheaper. So our currency has depreciated in relation to the Canadian dollar. And of course, it always has to happen that way. If one currency is appreciating, that means the other currency has to be depreciating. And again, you can just plug the numbers in the math to see how that happens. And so, of course, how would this affect trade between the US and Canada if the US dollar is depreciating? Again, using our previous example, we'll just plug the numbers in to see how that alters the prices. So let's say instead of a US citizen buying a Canadian sweater for $50, it was a Canadian citizen that wanted to buy a US sweater for $50. So we can look and see how the price changes when the exchange rate changes. Originally, when the price was listed at $50 in US dollars and the exchange rate was $1.33 for the Canadian dollar, you would just multiply 50 times $1.33, and we would see that that same sweater that sells for $50 in the United States would be equivalent to $66.50 for a Canadian purchasing it. When that exchange rate goes down to $1.25, that same sweater now only cost a Canadian $62.50 when you plug those numbers in and do the math. So again, theoretically, what should happen is if your currency is depreciating, that means your goods are going to be cheaper. You know, the price of your products is going to go down to your trading partners, so demand for your product should increase. So if these exchange rates were real, in other words, if the Canadian dollar was appreciating and the US dollar was depreciating, then that would mean we would be demanding less Canadian products, but Canadians would be demanding more US products. Now, if you're interested in seeing what the current exchange rates are between currencies, I have the website listed right here for you. So, you know, it's something fun to do in your spare time. Go on and see what the currency exchange rates are, because that may influence where you decide to take your vacation. You know, where are you going to have the most favorable currency conversion to make your US dollar stretch further when you travel abroad. Let's look at a couple of review questions here in regards to exchange rates. Let's say last month the cost of a Cancun vacation was going to cost you 2,000 pesos. However, this month the US dollar appreciated against the Mexican peso. If the price of the Cancun vacation remained the same at 2,000 pesos, how would you view this vacation now? Would you think that it's cheaper, that it's more expensive, that it's the same value, or would you need more information to determine the answer? Now, even though we don't know the actual exchange rates, the fact that I told you that there was appreciation taking place, that means that you will be able to determine how the price has changed. So in other words, we know the answer can't be D because we can determine it, we just won't know the exact amount. All right. Secondly, obviously, if a currency has appreciated or depreciated, like I've indicated in this problem, that means that the price of the foreign good has to be changing. So we know the answer can't be C, the same value, because of the fact that I stated that the US dollar appreciated. Now, if the US dollar is appreciating against the Mexican peso, meaning it's gaining value, that means that the Mexican peso is depreciating. And if the Mexican peso is depreciating, that means foreigners are going to view their goods cheaper now. So we know that the correct answer has to be A. In other words, their goods have to be cheaper to us because their currency has depreciated. So again, if the price stays the same in terms of the pesos, the denomination of 2,000 pesos, however the US dollar appreciates, that's going to mean that the Mexican vacation is now going to be cheaper to us. The second review question I have here, it says, given an exchange rate of 120 yen for 1 US dollar, what is the US dollar price of 1 yen? So again, I already told you, if you want to figure, if you know the exchange rate going one way, to figure out the exchange rate going the other way, all you have to do is take the reciprocal. So all we would do is 1 divided by 120. And of course, if you use your calculator to come up with the answer, you would come up with 0.0083, which again would basically round to 1 cent. In other words, we'd have to round that up to 1 penny. But technically, the correct answer then would be A. In other words, it would cost us 0.0083 cents to buy 1 yen. And let's just do one more review question. Let's say that the US dollar price of let's just stick with the Mexican peso, of a Mexican peso changes from, let's say, 0.1572 to 0.1730. So the US dollar price of a Mexican peso changes from approximately 16 cents to approximately 17 cents. And so I want to know, has the dollar appreciated or depreciated? And then of course I also want to know the same for the Mexican peso. Has the Mexican peso appreciated or depreciated? All right. So we just have to look at how the value has changed. So again, the problem states the US dollar price of a Mexican peso changes from, again, approximately 16 cents per peso to 17 cents per peso. So the peso has become more expensive to us. We now need more money to buy the Mexican peso. Or you can look at it as the US dollar has lost value in relation to the peso because we now need more of our money to buy the peso. So that would mean that the US dollar has depreciated in value because we now need more of our money to buy that currency. And at the same time, if our currency has depreciated, that means the Mexican peso has to be appreciating. In other words, we could take the reciprocal of those numbers to see how the Mexican peso has gained in relation to the US dollar. But we don't need to go through that and do that because we already know, just looking at these numbers, that the Mexican peso has gained value because you now need more US money to purchase a Mexican peso.